Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Dr. Gabriel Orsi, Program Manager at the Northwest Mental Health Technology Center based at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Lessons in Survival and Healing, Understanding the Difference and Why It Matters, presented by Elaine Walters. I'd like to take a moment to begin with a land acknowledgement. It's really hard to know what to say in the face of a serious historical injustice like those that have been faced by our Native communities in our region. But we ask for those engaging in this event to reflect on the lands in which we reside, work, and play, and acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and thank them for their stewardship of these lands. This moment of respect and acknowledgement calls us to commit to learn how to be better stewards of these lands ourselves through action, advocacy, support, and education. And thank you for observing with me this land acknowledgement. Hopefully this isn't too jarring of a transition, but I'd like to say a few words about the MHTTC network. This is a national network supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. Our network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. We also have sister networks for addiction and prevention that use the same structure. Our MHTTC here in the Northwest covers HHS Region 10, which is the states of Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. A little bit more about our center specifically. Our goals are to accelerate the adoption and implementation of mental health-related evidence-based practices, to heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the workforce, to foster alliances and address training needs among diverse partners, and to ensure availability and delivery of free, publicly available training and technical assistance. Although we do have a specific area of focus, which is evidence-based practices for serious mental health issues such as psychosis, we do provide training on a variety of topics from integrated care to suicide prevention, diversity and equity issues, school mental health, peer support, trauma-informed approaches, and a lot more. We fulfill our mission by providing free training and technical assistance, offering online self-paced courses, live events like this webinar, virtual learning communities, a newsletter, and more. And our target workforce is basically anyone who's in the behavioral health, mental health workforce, and primary care providers, school and social service staff, and others whose work has the potential to improve behavioral health outcomes for individuals with or at risk of developing serious mental health issues, again with a specific focus in our region. At the MHTTC network, one of our goals is to utilize affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all the work we do. We want to remain mindful of all the different perspectives that may be present at an event like this one. And we ask everyone to please communicate using language that is respectful, non-judgmental, inclusive, and accepting of diverse genders, cultures, abilities, and experiences. And this session is being recorded, so please keep that in mind as well. A quick word about housekeeping. I know many of us are super familiar with Zoom at this point, but we wanted to remind you that the audience members are muted and off camera. That's just how Zoom webinars work. We are recording this event and there is closed captioning, not perfect, but it's there. We will share the video recording and slides, and we'll send instructions on how to obtain your certificate of attendance as well. Usually takes us a few weeks to process those. Please use the chat for technical issues when you need our staff's help or to share comments, greetings, observations to everyone. If you have a question for our presenter Elaine today, please put that in the Q&A box instead. We monitor that to facilitate answering as many questions as possible, and it's much easier for us to keep track of those specific questions for her using that box rather than in the chat, which can be quite busy. A quick disclaimer, I won't read this whole slide to you, but please know that SAMHSA, though funding our work, does not officially take a position on what we're saying today. The opinions expressed are the views of the speakers and aren't reflective of what SAMHSA or the Department of Health or Human Services official positions are. All right. last but not least, I wanted to mention our evaluation on this slide as well. Your evaluation is very valuable to us. It helps us do better. It helps us know what went well. It's required by SAMHSA, our grant funder, and we really just appreciate your feedback and really ask that you take a minute to do the evaluation survey that we will share at the end of this presentation. The evaluation survey does ask for a personal code. Please don't be put off by the suggested personal code options. Just invent whatever you want. The personal code only really matters when it's a sustained multi-session training and you're trying to connect people over time to multiple evaluations. That's not the case today. This is a one-time webinar, so please just put in any code you want. We'd rather have you take the evaluation than worry about the code. So we can also answer any questions you may have about the evaluation survey after this presentation. Okay, it's my pleasure to present Elaine Walters, today's presenter. Elaine is the founding executive director and lead trainer at the Trauma Healing Project, an organization that provides professional and community training and direct healing support for survivors. Prior to this position, she coordinated the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner Program for the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Task Force in Oregon. For the last 25 years, she has been a consultant, trainer, and community organizer working to address and eliminate intimate violence. She has designed and facilitated workshops and trainings on many related topics and has provided direct services and supports to youth and adults impacted by violence, abuse, and other forms of trauma and oppression. She is involved in the effort to expand accessible trauma healing resources and to implement trauma-informed care practices regionally and statewide. It's my pleasure to present Elaine to everyone, and I will, without further ado, turn it over to her.
Thank you all. It's lovely to be with you, and thanks for all of the technical and emotional support for the team that's here as you're listed as your panelists. I appreciate doing this with all of you. I'm going to start by just noting what you all said, and then you'll see why in a little while. I'm looking at the survey that you all just took upon entry. Pretty phenomenal how many years of wisdom are in this meeting, and the work that you do is broad and deep. And I just want to appreciate and acknowledge all of you for what you continue to do in the world in terms of supporting healing and recovery for people who've had all kinds of life experiences across the very wide range. I added a question to that poll at the very bottom, which 100% of you that took the poll answered, about whether or not you ever bring in somatic or body-based practices into your work. And about 40% of you, only about 12% of you said a direct yes. And then another 29% of you, so about 41% say sometimes. Otherwise, it's either rarely or no. And so you'll sort of get why, but I thought I would share back with you just the results of your own kind of collective feedback on that particular point. If you were curious about it, I'm going to try to address your curiosity today. So I was mentioning to the folks that helped me get here that what I'm really going to do today is spend a little time in two directions. And let me go ahead and share my screen, and then I won't talk ahead of myself. You know, PowerPoints are really like metronomes. They sort of keep your pace and make sure that you don't forget things, but also so you don't double do them. So that's what I'm going to do. And somebody said they did not know what somatic was, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we go. But if you haven't used that term and you aren't bringing it into your practice, it's probably true. You're not. So a little bit more about that as we go today. So let me go ahead and share my screen and then get to the place where I can also see it. Are you all seeing it? Can somebody just give me a little thumbs up? Yep. Okay, good. Thank you. We are going to use your, I love those floating thumbs, don't you? Aren't those beautiful? So here's my slideshow. And here's where we're gonna go. You will have access to these, all of the slides at the end as per usual. And you'll also have, I will put it in my slides when I send them off to make sure that you have contact information for me in case there is anything you'd like to ask me further about or connect with me about after this presentation. So my introduction said a lot, but what it didn't tell you are some things that I am going to share with you, sort of a little about me, but really a little more about me. And I'm going to do that both as a founder and an activist around trauma healing work, but also as a survivor of trauma in my childhood and young adulthood as well. So I'm going to do a back and forth. It's going to be a little bit of a dance between sort of personal lived experience and what I've learned from that, and what I think I have to offer for those of you that are working with people that have experienced trauma as part of your practice. All right, and we will end with some things that I think are particularly important for you to know about what I think you ought to be doing for yourselves as well, and then we'll close. So here we go. So here's a little bit about me. My childhood had some good things. Despite being a survivor of pretty extensive trauma, I had early attachment with somebody who understood what that meant and actually studied it. My parents and their immediate family members were intelligent, and they also valued intelligence and education. That was something that has served me very well. My parents were also socially and politically progressive. And wherever they might have landed on the spectrum, what was really critical about that is that they were very open-minded and curious about what was going on in the world, and they paid a lot of attention, and they really helped us be aware and think about it as well. I had a mother that was very devoted, despite all of the things that interfered with her ability to attach and parent the way she would have wanted to. She was devoted. And what I mean by survivor here is that she was tough. She was determined, and she was determined around being a mother as well as about her own life. My father also, again, flaws and all, he had a capacity during an era that wasn't so common to be very physically affectionate, even with my brother and other males. And so I got that modeled for me. He is also very intelligent as well, and sort of devoted to learning. So internal temperament wise, or survival in my family wise, I ended up being an extrovert and very, very strong willed, which also both served me really, really well. And you'll hear more about that. And here I thought, why not show you pictures? This was the good. This is my parents, my mother with me, and then me as the big sister to my brother and sister. So then there is the way we human beings, including this human being, get hurt, right? The way I got hurt, the way we get hurt. And this is probably just total repeat for you, but I like this framing a lot because trauma was talked about for a long time as something that was sort of outside of the norm. And really, it's about being human. And there's all kinds of ways we get hurt. And I got hurt by accident. Nobody meant them to happen, through direct, patterned, intentional abuse, which included reenactment for the people that were hurting me, but also the need and attempt to dominate, however that fits in your framework. The thing we don't talk about as much, we're beginning to think about historical trauma more sort of as collective trauma and maybe intergenerational trauma. But I think just person to person to person, whether we're talking about genetics or whether we're talking about sort of social structures and development, we actually do inherit the trauma and the adversity and the struggles of the people that went before us. And this is really pronounced when folks don't get a chance to heal. It's also really pronounced when we sit inside of this larger container of oppression, where it's not that it just happened 3 generations ago getting passed down. It's actually still happening. Many people are still being targeted for oppression, which in my definition, very abbreviated definition, is institutional, systematic mistreatment of one group of people by another. Of course, we know it extends beyond human life and can be applied to other forms of life and our planet as well. All of those things were experiences that affected me deeply, every single one of them. My childhood included constant moving for reasons that I don't have time to share with you. My father was abusive to my mother. There was sexual abuse in my childhood and later in my life as well. Chaos and neglect were probably the most prominent feature, and also have been really the hardest for people to think about. When I've gone into therapeutic circles, looking for help and support, the incident specific direct things that I've encountered seem to be more easily responded to by the people that I'm working with than that sort of general chronic chaos and neglect. I think we're getting a handle on that. The more we think about attachment, the more we think about sort of somatic and expressive physical emoting and release. I think we're getting to some of that a little bit better, but that's been a tricky one for a lot of people. And it also hasn't been a focus of study. And there was a custody battle, and bottom line, we, the children, lost. Now, this is a really good time to point out that I am not going to be sharing graphic details. I know that some of this topic can feel or be uncomfortable, but it is not my intention to trigger or impact you other than to give you space to think. Even if you're a little bit uncomfortable, that's fine. But I will not be sharing graphic details, and I'm not going to ask you to listen to my pain. You can just assume that it's there. And the other thing that you can assume is that I have very, very good, well-established resources to take care of myself when things come up for me. And I'm going to hope the same thing and encourage the same thing is true for you. Okay. Thank you for those hearts. So what you may or may not be able to see in these pictures. So the picture to the left is my family without my father. That's my grandmother or my mother and my aunt, who's very close in age to me. Same in the middle picture is my grandmother, my mother, and my aunt. What you might notice if you look deeply enough is that they're looking a little worse for the wear. That in the early pictures, in the first picture, there was this lightness. And there's, the other thing is true is that my family, in addition to me experiencing all of those different sets of ways we could be hurt, my people were. My father and mother were born right at the tail end of, or right during World War II. There was a lot going on, and a lot of things got passed down from those experiences. That wasn't the only thing going on, but that was a very, very big, prominent reality for people in 1936 and 37 and through the early 40s in this country. That's my mother on the far right with my son. There's so much to say about that picture, but I will just let you register it, and then I'm going to keep going. So the definition of trauma that we have used at the Trauma Healing Project since its very inception is not a clinical definition. And I share this with you partly as a nod to where we're heading with the lessons that I would like to share with you around what we've learned in both this activist work to address trauma, but also those of us that have done a lot of healing. Trauma is not just a clinical description of something. And Bonnie Burstow, if you haven't read her work, is a phenomenal thinker, and she worked her whole career until her death, really, to humanize trauma and an understanding of healing. She's easy to find online. She's written a fiction book that's to die for, really easy to read, and she's just a beautiful thinker. She says, and we latched on and have agreed, that trauma is not a disorder, but a reaction to a kind of wound. It is a reaction to profoundly injurious events and situations in the real world, and indeed to a world in which people are routinely wounded. Those of you that were privy to the DSM-3, the DSM-4, are going to recognize that this was a counter response to that, right? That this is, first of all, thinking about the experience of trauma as purely subjective, I think, is very problematic, and it's very, very prevalent still. That people assume that my trauma is your irritation and your trauma is my irritation, but that it's completely subjective, kind of misses the piece in this sentence that says we're really talking about profoundly injurious events and situations in the real world. That's objective. Those things are harmful, they're damaging, they're life-threatening. In fact, some of them are fatal, and we've been witness to that. But these are objectively traumatizing things, and there's some mitigators for how that lasts within us. But we're not talking about getting activated or having feelings about something. We're talking about profoundly injurious events and situations in the real world. And one of the lessons that I would like you to take away today is that trauma has become kind of mainstreamed as a language, as a way to talk, and it's being minimized, and it's being used very sort of haphazardly. And what that does when we all know language matters. When we use trauma without this definition wrapped around it, and we just sort of use it offhandedly or without thinking, we can have a tendency to sort of be numb to the reality of suffering that many people have had and still have, and that we are experiencing as human beings. And it also sort of normalizes it. And while I want us to understand the normal reactions to trauma that human beings have, I don't want to normalize the brutality that humans continue to act out on each other and make that normal. So be thoughtful when you use that word trauma, that you mean it when you use it, because it is certainly very prevalent, and we can use it if we're willing to face the reality and really mean it. But let's don't just accidentally use the word trauma. All right. So trauma is a concrete physical, cognitive, affective, and spiritual response by individuals and communities to events and situations that are objectively traumatizing. And on a simple level, for the most part, people feel traumatized or wounded because they have been. This is a nod towards the way traumatic and memories of trauma work in our minds and in our nervous systems. We may misassign an experience to somebody that's not really hurting us. So, for example, I'm in a therapy session with you, and my feelings get stirred up, and I get activated, and I think you're hurting me. And the reality is, it's the color of your hair or the tone of your voice or the time of the year that's got me activated. But my feeling of trauma is also an indication that there is direct trauma. I may not exactly have the direct link, but that sensation, that reactivity, that comes from real experience. The other thing to know is that human beings don't tend to over exaggerate. We tend to under-report. And we tend to compartmentalize so that we don't actually have direct access to memories. So just sort of a last point on this definition. So thank you. Here's a few conclusions, and we're going to work with these a little bit. I have not found anybody that is not impacted by trauma, even if they weren't direct targets. But we live in a world where trauma is happening, where people are traumatized, and where the impacts of those experiences play out in worlds that we're part of. We're not separate. There is no us and them. I do also want to say that not all trauma is equal, and some of us have experienced levels and complexities of traumatic experiences that are very different than others. And so I don't want to just lump it all together, but I also want to say that the repercussions are intergenerational, they're communal, they're collective, and they are sometimes running decisions. They are the things that people are basing decisions on, including people in leadership in our governments and in our institutions. That sometimes what's driving certain decisions is experiences of unhealed trauma or fear that is sitting there in front of them. All right. And that's what I mean when I say that unresolved trauma negatively impacts individual and community health and mental health, our quality of life, our ability to be effective in our work, and our capacity to create just societies. All of them are impaired by this untended, unresolved historical and interpersonal experiences of trauma and violence. Okay. Here's where we're going to spend a bit of time, and that is that managing the consequences is not the same as healing and resolution. So managing the consequences of trauma can come in lots of different forms, but in mental health work, they tend to be around being able to tolerate, being able to stay present. They also may be the use of certain medications. In the larger society, one way we manage the consequences of trauma is to put people in jail or to reject and exclude people. We also label and use control measures to sort of manage things. We teach practices that can be incredibly useful and important around behavior management, around managing and repressing and holding off feelings. Those are strategies that are actually very prominent in many of our trainings around what we do with somebody in the face of upset. All right. And I'm going to say a lot more about that. And those things may very well be important and required, but they are not the same as healing. So on the coping side of things, that managing side of things, and I've heard somebody lately say, and I'm not 100% sure yet how I feel about this, but I heard it said the other day that coping is what we do instead of or until we are able to access healing resources and to really process what happened to us. And sometimes, unfortunately, we get stopped at the coping. It's really where a lot of our research focuses, and also where a lot of our practices take us. And we don't study well enough, and we don't support well enough moving from coping to healing. All right. And so on the coping side is self-control, behavior management, suppression of feelings, suppression of what we call symptoms, avoidance of triggers, desensitization, and then denial and disconnection. And we know that those are really actually very critical to survival. And again, sometimes that's where we stop. And sometimes those things are critical and they keep us alive. So I'm not dissing coping. I'm just suggesting that it might not be our stopping point. When we add the healing process, sometimes we also need stabilization that we can get through those coping strategies that will allow us to move into a healing process. But here are some things that I have both experienced, witnessed, and learned about that I think are included when we start moving towards that healing process. That we're really talking about expression with attention. We do a lot of expression solo, and it doesn't seem to work as well as when we have attention. And that can be from you in your practices, in your offices, in your groups, in your individual work with people. Somebody being able to express with your attention. Emotive processing and release with and through the body. And for any of you that have been in private practice or working with folks that have experienced hard things over any period of time, you know that occasionally, if not often, somebody will begin spontaneously showing emotion and being emotional simply because you're loving them, because you're paying calm, relaxed attention. You're contradicting something internally that brings up the space for them to actually show you the feelings underneath. What we do with that may vary, but if you've had those experiences, you're probably holding space in a way that allows people to notice that you're there, and that they're at least momentarily safe enough to show you their feelings. Now, sometimes people will look terrified when that's happening, and we'll talk about that in a little bit because I think that can be confusing. Um, Emotive processing and release looks a lot like shaking, laughing, crying, yawning, maybe moving, sweating. All of those things can kind of come up, sometimes spontaneously, and sometimes you're facilitating that intentionally and making space for it. And that would be what somebody would call somatic work. All right. Remembering, and the hyphen is intentional. The hyphen is about the parts of the brain and the way we sometimes have to cope in the face of a lack of resource or the level or frequency of chaos or trauma can have us dissociate, right? So if you think about the very simplistic, not I'm not a neurobiologist, but I love thinking about this, that we have the base brain, we have the limbic system, and we have the sort of cognitive frontal cortex part of the brain. And when we are under severe enough stress or threat, we sometimes, those parts of the brain which normally in the best of times and should be as our baseline are in touch with each other. This part of the brain talks to this part of the brain, and they're all being kind of mitigated and moderated by the frontal cortex. If we live too long or experience too serious a threat with chronic stuff, we can sometimes go offline. We can also lose touch with our body and our sensations. So we can get very dismembered. We can have parts of our brain that are not in communication with each other, and we can lose some of our internal communication and functioning, and all the way to those extremes where we can sometimes not feel physical feelings or we cannot feel emotional feelings, right? There's a disconnection. And so what I mean by remembering is whatever practices and processes you use to bring a person back into connection. Sometimes that is a remembering. Sometimes people will actually have that memory kind of remembering when they're doing that work. All of a sudden, they're back in touch with their body and they feel pain that they've been out of touch with, and they remember what hurt them. So that can also happen, but it's not a process of trying to make sense of a particular narrative or memory. It is this part of our brain coming back in touch. It's sometimes our mind with our body coming back in touch. And sometimes it is our connections with other people, right? And that's where this reconnection and engagement comes in. Spiritual healing, I do not know a lot about it, but I've listened to so many people talk about having a connection with something larger than themselves, which both gives them a framework to work inside of, but also helps them put themselves back together or helps support them to come back together as a more fully functioning, connected person. All right, so you may know more about that than I do. Intentional realignment, and that is sort of mind, body, breath, movement, again, coming back into your body, but also keeping your mind in present time. Um, Reconnection and engagement, I already talked a little bit about, but also mostly this work needs to happen human to human. There's brilliant things that we do in self-care: reading, learning, studying, watching, witnessing, study, all of those things that we can do solo. We even can have a lot of feelings by ourselves, but what we're seeing for people that do that work solo is that there's a piece of work that they can't get to because the work is really relational. We get hurt mostly, most deeply, most profoundly by other people and through relationships. And it seems that the way we're wired, the way our nervous systems are wired, the way our social structures are set up for us, that the deepest healing work really does happen in the company of humans that can stay present with us. This is not a solo project. Despite how well so many of us have done, there's a little bit that we need to do with other people, if not a lot for some of us. So let me stop right there and see if there are any questions in the chat. I see that I just want to make sure. Anybody have a question or a comment? I'm watching the messages. Why would you want them to live that pain again? Oh, what a beautiful question. Well, so the brilliant thing about somatic processing and coming back in touch with pain is that they're not actually reliving the pain again. Yes, there's a book called let me answer one question at a time. So the question is, why would we want somebody to relive that pain again? And it's a really, really good question. What I will tell you is that feeling the feelings that we have repressed about that experience is the part that hasn't been done yet. The pain actually won't happen again. Anybody that you're working with that is processing trauma is processing something that is no longer happening. So the original pain and the survival of what happened has already happened. But what hasn't happened is that people haven't actually been able to offload that stored, accumulated reaction and non-processed feelings. And so there's a little bit of a confusion, I think, and this is another thing that I've learned kind of the hard way. The expression of feelings, if I'm sobbing or if I'm shaking because I'm in touch with something that actually happened to me in the past, what's happening is that I'm discharging and releasing it. And it's true, you don't want me to dive in too deep and not be aware of you. But if I'm in 2023 and I have you with me and I am re experiencing the feelings, but I can tell that you're with me, I am actually not reliving the pain again. I am with you. I am no longer by myself. I am sitting with you and I am visiting and releasing. And you want to do that in manageable doses, which is why so many people are studying somatics because there is a way to sort of stay within a manageable process. But to a person, anybody that I've watched actually come back in touch with memories and express the feelings from those memories are relieved afterwards. Sometimes they have to do it more than once, many, many times. They come back and they come back, but there is actually a lightening up and a release that happens. And people actually get what you don't realize you're repressing when you're not feeling pain is that you're often also having to repress your joy and the richness of your life. And so the dip into pain and then the coming back out also allows you to feel more of a range of human sensations that many of us are repressing. Does that make that? Okay, so now I'm going to see if I can read these questions. Let me just broaden this. Hang on a second. So I'm watching the time. So what are the ways to allow further exploration of the trauma? I'm going to ask you to do study on your own in that way. But what I would say is that human babies are wired already to do the physiological release. If you watch an infant or a 2-year-old who's been hurt, who's been made to put away their toys and been picked up without permission, and they have a big cry, that you are watching a human healing process at work. And if we can stay present with that process while keeping somebody aware that we're with them, then human beings are kind of wired to process it. How you do that in your clinical practice is something I want you to research and study, because the other thing that has to be true is that you have to have the capacity to stay present. And if you're not comfortable, it's not going to work very well. So you're going to go in and out and in and out in a way as a therapist or a clinician or a support person that is going to make sense for you. So I can't really answer that for you. You need to do this study. All right. Somebody says, I've experienced the somatic process. It's so powerful. The more I allowed it to come up and recognize it, the less power it had as I processed through it. Beautiful. I love Jin Shintara as a somatic practice. So you're all sharing ideas. I'm going to let you share that with each other. And please, maybe if you have answers to some of these questions or resources to send folks to, I would really invite you to do that. All right. What we're confused about culture in therapeutic settings is the same as what we're confused about in the culture. We are a very pain avoidant culture, it's really the basis of capitalism and consumption, is that we do anything but feel hard feelings. And so getting comfortable and relaxed as humans are expressive with pain is part of our job on the planet, not just in therapeutic settings. So I'm going to keep going. Thank you for the questions. And here's a reference to it. So Julian Weisglass is somebody you can also find and read. He's a very thoughtful guy. He's talking about the continual disparagement and repression of youngsters' expressions. Youngsters' expressions of feelings have their effects. Now, think about the youngsters as us, right? How were feelings allowed or not allowed in your worlds when you were young? All right. Most adults become and are uncomfortable about honestly revealing their own feelings and unable to give attention to others when they convey strong emotion. So adults stop others' attempts to express feelings by looking away, interrupting with a personal story, changing the subject, communicating discomfort through body language or facial expressions, admonishing each other to sort of stop feeling that way, or offering a drink or a tranquilizer or other distraction. We are a little bit uncomfortable with big feelings. And many of our clinical training schools do not make a place for staying present in the face of strong emotion. So here's a little opportunity. I want you to just take a notice. These feelings could show up in your office. And then what I'd like you to do, I'm gonna share a poll with you that I would love for you to take. And remember, this is an anonymous poll, and I would like it if you would take this poll. And you can answer as many of these as make sense. And then I'll share the results. Nobody will see your specific answers. All right. Give me a little picture. Keep it open a little bit longer. Any of the above. You're allowed to check any of the above. About 75% of you have finished. I'm going to just give you another half a minute. Anybody else want to finish it? Now's your chance. I'm going to do a 10-second countdown on my end. Okay, let me show you what you said. I'm going to stop the share here and let me share the results. So I'm hoping you can all see them. You should be able to scroll down if you can't see the whole thing. All right. So that was the poll we just did, was handling strong emotions. All right. And so here are your answers. And I did leave a nice out, which I appreciate that many of you answered, and that is you respond differently. You respond differently depending on a variety of factors, which could include anything from your relationship with a person to whether you're getting strong emotions 2 minutes before the end of a session, whether you feel comfortable with this person showing these kinds of feelings, and I appreciate that people sort of said that the highest percent of you said that you respond differently depending on a variety of factors. But many of you suggested that you supported folks to express their feelings at any level. And then another chunk of you said you support them to express their feelings at a moderated level. And so for those of you that said moderated level, I'm assuming that you either have some personal skill set that comes with that, or that you have some specific skills around the level that you want to be working with people. Now, it's interesting to me that sometimes having a conversation about feelings is hard. It's hard in general, but it's also hard with folks that haven't been given training. I mean, most of our training programs around counseling and therapeutic work still helps us sets us up to try to solve problems. We have our clients come in, they set goals, we give them advice and guidance and support, and that sometimes we don't get a chance or the training that we need to try staying present while people are processing trauma. And generally speaking, I have not seen somebody get very far relieving or resolving trauma without some level of contact, human contact with supportive people that are not freaked out by the stories or the feelings that they're expressing. And that there is the ability to kind of go in and out of emotional expression. So that's what I hope folks are saying when they stay present, or that they stay present and they help moderate those feelings. So somebody asked, why do I feel that this really means we are meant to get over it? Well, if I'm interpreting that question correctly, there is some question about whether we should ever get over trauma. And I would say get over it is maybe not the word I would use, but I do think that we are designed and have the capacity to integrate those experiences so that we don't lose any of the wisdom, any of the knowledge, any of the memory of those experiences that can be useful to us and can help us really be thoughtful and compassionate with other people. I would never want you to lose your wisdom, your knowledge, or your connection to those experiences. But when trauma stays stuck in the limbic system and it doesn't get processed, it drives us sometimes. And so the goal is not to get over it. In fact, that's actually what the culture pushes us to, is just get over it, get on with it. Don't even pretend you didn't have it. That is absolutely the opposite of what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we get to integrate it, that it becomes part of our story instead of the driver for everything. So that would be my goal for that. Let me see if evaluative responses are vital to our continued funding. Yeah, if you need to leave early at any point, please take the evaluation. Yes, sometimes an escalation becomes possibly violent, and that is where the moderated level comes into play. And it can be, you also don't want somebody tumbling out of your office in a really escalated state. So the practice of staying present with feelings is not just open-ended, which is why I suggest you do your own study on what works for you and what you're curious about or interested in. We are not talking about ripping a Band-Aid off or opening somebody up and then sending them out to drive their car. We're actually talking about a process that you are facilitating with somebody also developing resource to sort of go in and out. Because the other thing that happens is the first time you have a big cry or you shake really hard when you remember something, it can feel like you're never going to be able to put it back in the bottle. And I think we need our clients and the folks that we work with to understand that they get to be in charge of this and that there's no push, that it's with support, and that they get to put it back and get grounded and present and go back into their world, not still open-ended and upset when they walk out our door. So our focus can be to expand our window of tolerance and not erase trauma, to be practical, realistic, helpful, and sensible in managing our trauma. Yeah. All right. Somebody says, I think only if the trauma is interfering or causing distress for the client. So how you assess that is a really interesting conversation, and it's much longer than we have time for today. But one of the things that's hard to figure out sometimes as a survivor is how trauma is still affecting me. So this is where we need to lean into you folks and to the folks that are supporting us to help us understand that trauma's impacts and drivers can cause distress at a very subconscious level. And so being able to unearth the unhealed stuff is not about poking. It's not really about poking. It's really using the goals that a client comes in with and then noticing, because you have some understanding, what the kinds of things are that may be driving something or causing some of these challenges. It's not to just dig for the sake of digging. So absolutely in alignment with goals, in alignment with your own practice and your own expertise, but you understanding where and how trauma comes into play and where and how other unhealed distress comes into play is the part of the job that is nice for us to count on you to do, if that makes sense. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to have to keep it. Yeah, so you're all writing very wonderful things to each other, and I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time. So let me, and I'm going to ask Gabrielle and others to let me know if you see something that I missed that I should respond to. That would be helpful. Maybe you can moderate the questions. So, all right. So here's where we're going. So I read the first three before. The last one is where I kind of want to land us. And that is that it's very clear from my own personal experience, and probably from many of yours as well, that we have the capacity to heal, and that even when we're doing sort of not so good things for ourselves, we are regularly making attempts to feel better and to have our lives go better. There's a lot of motivation and drive to resolve. Our minds have, for example, what do we call them? Intrusive thoughts. One way of looking at intrusive thoughts is that we need to knock them back down. Another way to look at intrusive thoughts is that our minds want us to take care of these things that are underneath. Now, maybe the intrusive thought is not a good historian. Maybe it's just a feeling or a set of things that keep popping into somebody's head that they're ruminating about. But that process of having things kind of leak out of us or come up is an indication that there is something that needs tending. All right. And I think of that as a drive towards healing, often with information that we can use in therapeutic work with people. I think we can harness and attend to healing very intentionally, and I think we can get better and better at it. This is a really interesting study, and this is going to take us into where I want you to go, and that is that it turns out that if you go and have your brain imaged when you're 55 and older, there's a very good accuracy. They can actually predict with a high degree of accuracy what your cognitive function is going to look like, how well you problem solve, how well you remember things, how well you comprehend. They do a battery of assessment tests. And everybody has talked for a long time about social support being one of the things that help us live longer, live better, keep our cognitive function intact longer. But in that study, where they looked at brain volume and brain images, there was a group of people that did better than everybody else on average. And they looked at social support to see if they could get a clue. And they looked at somebody giving you advice, having enough love and affection. Do you get enough emotional support? Do you have sufficient contact, just human to human contact? And do you get listened to? Is there somebody, the exact question was, is there somebody in your life that you can talk to who will listen to you? All right. That last one was absolutely, hands down, the only one that made any statistical difference. That was it. Supportive listening. So thinking about yourselves as therapists and the degree to which there is space in sessions with the people that you work with, or if you're a supervisor or a parent, is there space in your interactions where the folks that you are paying attention to or caring about are able to just get your full listening attention? And do you get that anywhere in your life? This next slide, I don't get to do with you because we don't have breakout rooms, but you're going to get it. I would love for you to try this on your own. 5 minutes each way with somebody who's not going to interrupt you, who's going to keep what you say confidential, who's going to listen without judgment or advice or direction or paraphrasing or even interrupting your silence. 5 minutes, you get listened to like that to share anything that you want to share. And then you take a turn and you pay that kind of attention to somebody else. Now, this is the basis for the kind of work that I have been able to use as somebody healing from trauma that has made the most difference for me, because my mind has a way of knowing where to go. And with consistent caring attention, I actually do begin to have feelings, and they are within I'm in charge of them. So I might have feelings with one of you that I wouldn't have with another. So just hold that as a placeholder, because we're going to come back to that. The consequences of trauma are completely multidimensional and holistic. They're emotional, they're physical, they can impair and affect development, they're social, they're individual, intergenerational, and collective, and all of them need to be tended in all of these areas. Now, these slides I wanted to share with you, but I want you to just catch the top 3. Remember what I was saying about integration. Stabilization is where a lot of our protocols focus first, as they should. Processing is something that we're beginning to understand, and integration is actually critical to resolving trauma. Again, not getting over it, but integration. And here's a list of things that may be familiar to you, may not be, and they are not exhaustive. These are not all of the things, but I wanted to give you a little taste. And then I want you to look at these pictures, and I want you to notice. And because I don't get to have all 260 of you talking with each other or sharing with me, I'm going to give you some things that people have said in looking at these pictures before that I hope you notice. One of the things that you will notice if you look carefully, that took me a while actually to notice, is that in every picture, there is a receiver and a giver of attention. People are taking turns, or they're giving turns. Now, as a counselor, as a parent, you're not asking for that as a turn taking, but you are in the giving position. And you need to have that in place for somebody to really get to express. All right, there's somebody giving to the person or people that are receiving. Yeah. The other things that are present in these pictures, if like me, you interpret these as healing moments, is touch. Very difficult to do in most of our disciplines, but touch is critical. And there are sort of replacement touch things that you do when you're on telemedicine, or when you're doing touch, or when you're supporting touch in physical spaces where you're in the same room with somebody. If you can't hold somebody's hand or give them a hug, you can express that touch. You can ask somebody to put their hand in their own hand and imagine feeling you. Just notice what it's like when I kind of reach towards you and offer you, or I say, just imagine me putting my hands on your face. Now, some of you are just going to run out of the room, I know, but practicing embodiment and touch, people have imprints, so they can remember the feeling of touch, even if you're not allowed or able to touch them. The other thing that I would say is present in all 3 of these is love. And I so appreciate the little hearts I'm getting. But there is no doubt, whether we're allowed to say it or not, that our love for the people that we are caring for gets through. It is a component, if not a requirement, that supports human connection. And it might just be the natural way we're wired. Not quite sure about that. But love is present in every single one of these pictures. All right. So think about where you can let yourself be not so much explicit telling people that you love them, but being in touch with the way you love people as part of your practice. Your clients will feel it and it will make a difference. And it'll probably rejuvenate your practice if that's been absent for any length of time. All right. So similarly, we can do healing work that I think is really important at a community level. Stabilization, what we do to make sure people have basic needs and safety intact, what shared collective processing can look like. And then again, how do we integrate those experiences? And here's a couple of ideas on these lists. All right. So here's what I would say about my own. For me, bringing it back around, that I got to parent. We got to grow up together and I learned a hell of a lot and they pushed every button I had and I needed outside help. Community connection probably saved my life, as did having access and support for education for my own practice and for receiving that quality of healing attention that I've been alluding to. Healthy relationships, no small thing. All right. And then lastly, what I would say is that the work towards establishing the Trauma Healing Project really put my money where my mouth was. All right. So what if my own experience and the experiences of others that I've gotten to be close to or witnessed of healing, what if that were like the law of the land? What if people could count on fully integrating the experiences that they've not gotten to process, so that they could have their full capacity back? Well, so a couple of folks got together and we said, why don't we try something? And so here's just a picture. It's not the Trauma Healing Project, it's my family. We definitely moved. The top picture are my siblings. The picture to the right are my grandchildren, my first grandchild and my brother's children. And then this is my immediate family on the bottom left. We grew, we moved. We're still all trying to heal because the stuff did get handed down. All right. So here are the key components of a healing environment from the Trauma Healing Project's perspective and many others. Understanding and acceptance of the wide range of human emotion, relationship-based, having working agreements, democratic participation in our own therapeutic processes as well as our communities, valuing of each life, respect-based, normalizing of human survival strategies and experiences, not abandoning us to them, but helping us make sense of where they came from in our journey to change them. Consciousness and attention to power differences. This is where we move from an expert or a charity model to a partnership model to an empowerment model where we actually back people up to use their own minds to heal and to integrate their own experiences. Expectations of self and each other care, where we're going to land. And then it's not without conflict. We kind of plan on it and we organize around handling it. Can I just get a time check? Gabrielle, can you tell me?
Yeah, we're at 12:33, so we have finished our allotted, or just about at our allotted time for today. We have 12:45 as our final cutoff. So
okay, so I would like about 3 more minutes and then I will stop. And then will we have time for questions after that or no?
The end time of the webinar is 12:45. Is that what you were asking?
Yes. Is there business you need to take care of before that, or is it just question time?
We don't have business. We'd love to hear more from you and answer questions. And then at 12:45, we'll close everything down.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think I'm doing all right.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So Despite this looking super simple, change and learning being facilitated and accepted, this really requires that we be doing our own change and learning, because we have our endpoints, and that's where we'll be able to go with our clients and the people that we're supporting. And so we have to be pushing our own edges and growing and learning. Plus, it's way more fun. But here's this quote that I really love. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And by lived again, I don't mean that we don't have feelings about it. And I don't think that's what she means. It means that we don't have to cause new trauma. We don't have to reenact and repeat what's happened. But I think this word faced is really, really critical. And it can kick up a lot of worry and discouragement, especially if there's not been anybody listening to us through our own professional journey or in our own lives. And so this facing isn't going to happen unless we're able to face these really unbearable places that we all carry. All right. So here's Vandana Shiva. She says, I do not allow myself to be overcome by hopelessness. Isn't that nice? I wish I could say that. Sometimes I do. No matter how tough the situation, I believe that if you just do your little bit without thinking of the bigness of what you stand against, if you turn to the enlargement of your own capacities, just that itself creates new potential. Absolutely. Here's what I want for all of you. I want you to have a place where you can experience, feel, bring up what happens to you when you are in support, when you are in support of other people. Where do you get supervision? Where do you get peer support? Where does somebody listen to what's getting awakened in you about what's happening in a process you're providing for somebody else? And then how do you bring reflection into that? And I would start with feelings. I would start with feelings. I would start with where this ties into your early days and your own life story. And then I'd move to reflection. Sometimes we go right to problem solving and we skip this facing that I think Vandana Shiva or Maya Angelou is talking about. And I think this is a capacity building practice. All right. So you bring those in, you reflect on them, and then and with nobody qualifying them, you use your own mind with supportive guidance of somebody that you trust. And then you can move forward in your own practice and also in your own healing. Here's some questions that you can take home with you that we're not going to practice. I just want you to have them. And then I want you to think about where and how, and there's a poll, but I don't think we're going to take time to do that. I just want you to look at all of the places where it probably makes sense for you to do this. And then the slide where I want to land us on, in Eugene, Springfield, where I am situated, Trauma Healing Project did a survey. We did it once in 2009 and we did it again in 2012. And we listened to people who everybody that we listened to said yes to the question about whether they had ever experienced violence or abuse in their lives. So these were all people that had a trauma history. And we asked them how far along they were in their own healing journey. And they had 4 options: not at all, somewhat, mostly, or completely healed. And I think we had a total of about 425 people that took those surveys. How far along are you in your own healing from anything that happened to you that was traumatic? Not at all, somewhat, mostly, or completely healed. And then elsewhere in the survey, we asked people what kind of response or support they got after that traumatic or those traumatic experiences. And it turns out that there was a deep connection, very statistically significant connection. When people who had experienced trauma said that they had been listened to, however they defined that, but with compassion, they were almost 3 times more likely to report being mostly or completely healed. When they believed that people understood the impact of trauma on their lives and why they've been so challenged or struggled the way they have, more than twice as likely to report being mostly or completely healed. And then lastly, when they believed that people knew something about how to help them, like what does the healing process look like? What will it look like when I do integrate this trauma? More than twice as likely to report being mostly or completely healed. These are therapeutic components. These are human ways of being with one another. I think these are the pillars of trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive practice. So that is my last slide. So I'm going to stop the share. We have all of 6 minutes, which is way more than I ever land having. So I want to thank you for your wonderful attention and questions. And then I would love help moderating the questions that are coming in.
Yeah, so there's some questions in the Q&A, and I thought we might start with perhaps the simplest one, which is that Jody asks, you highly endorsed a book by Bonnie Burstow. What is the title? So she searched online and several piqued
So there's
Jody's
actually
interest.
there's actually a fictional book. It's called The House on Lippincott Street. And it's a story. She was a child of Holocaust survivors, and she wrote a book sort of laying out the intergenerational, fictional story of intergenerational trauma in a family that was just coming to grips with their own story. In fact, the children didn't know they were Jewish, I think, when they were being raised and putting, connecting the dots. Anyway, that's a fabulous, easy read. And then she's all over. You can actually get recordings of her talking about some of the work that she's done easily on Google. Just look her up. You'll find her.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. There's a question about which somatic practices do you incorporate into your sessions?
So I'm not a clinician. Did you not figure that out yet? I tricked you, somebody at least. I actually do peer sessions, so I do co-exchanges, and I think there are some techniques that I bring in. They're not actually bounded by a particular somatic practice, but a couple of techniques that I think are really critical. I mentioned a little bit, and one of them is what I would call balance of attention. If your person is sort of looking like they're far away and not in the room with you, you need to get them back. Even if they're having deep expression of feelings, if they're over there alone in that deep suffering place, they're not doing productive work. They're just replaying the trauma, which is what several of you have been worried about. What you want is you want them to notice that you're there and go visit those places in and out while they're very aware of you. So they are an adult or a teen or a young person, but they are in present time with you. It's called balance of attention. And you go peek together, which will bring up feelings. You're not reliving it. You're actually visiting together. And if they are not aware of you in the contact, then they're probably gone the other way. So balance of attention is one of those. The other is, I think, experimenting with something called contradictions. I feel stupid. I've always been called stupid. I'm just dumb. I can't figure out anything. Now, one thing you could say to me is, but you're so smart. And that just bounces off me like acorns on the ground, right? It doesn't go in. So what you want to fish for is a contradiction that highlights my intelligence without poking at my sort of shield. And that might look something like, did you just tell me? Did you just say that thing? Did you just put those two things together? Did you just make something really make sense to me that I've never heard for the first time? I'm probably going to laugh because now you've contradicted it with a real authentic connection to my intelligence. And it's kind of hard to pretend like I didn't just add 2 + 2 and have it equal 4, or I didn't just put together these two theories and make sense of them. So you've highlighted my intelligence without poking at my shield. And that's called a contradiction. Right. And there's millions of ways you can try that. But if the pattern somebody is wearing is deflated or defeated or feeling stupid or disconnected, what you're doing for a contradiction with balance of attention is helping illuminate that something different might actually be true. And that's a contradiction. And you'll know it's the right one because they'll show feelings immediately. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Sort of a segue from your answer. Kim is asking, is there any difference when working with teens?
Oh, yeah, they'll give you a total run for your money, and they will test you at every stage to see if you can handle their pain. So if you want to work with teens, being able to lighten up, not getting, if you look worried, this will be true for adults too, because what works with teens will work with adults, but what works with adults doesn't always work with teens. But if you can work with teens, you can work with adults. And I am not kidding about that. If you know how to lighten it up, if you can stay connected and not get heavy and not look worried, you will be doing well by both the young people and adults. When we worry about them, it's their job to take care of us, and then we've lost it. So the minute we look worried, we are more about ourselves than them. And so our job is to hold attention without diving into their suffering. So you have to trust a teen's mind. You have to trust their intelligence, and might have to remind yourself, oh my God, what they're doing is terrible, scary, at risk. And you have to think, well, yeah, wonder why, and get curious. Yeah.
Thank you for that as well. We're just about at time here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with folks? People are asking some sort of very specific questions in our Q&A about particular client situations, like how much support is enough and how deep to go without going too deep, and how to help people navigate in our dog eat dog world sometimes with the lack of
I know
resources.
I see some of these questions.
These are fabulous questions. I wish we could answer.
Here's what I would like to land on. Your capacity to stay present in the face of suffering and pain without getting sucked into it and without worrying about other people is going to be key. And you don't need money for that, but you do need practice, and you do need a place where you get to experience facing your own unbearable spots and noticing that you live through that, and that you learn some skills around. You'll just have more spaciousness if you are getting to offload some of the barriers that you already carry as a human being. And you need to do it on a regular basis. It's not go work out your trauma and then be a therapist. It's the whole time you're a human being on the planet. You need places to offload and release, and you are totally worth it. And you are the pillar of trauma sensitive and trauma specific care. You being in really good shape and in a moving place. It's not static, it's moving. And so that's what I would ask from all of you. Yeah, we are up against really hard stuff, and we really need you in the best shape possible. So
yeah, you can't fill another's cup if your teapot is empty. Well,
right.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I personally learned a lot. I'm seeing a lot of gratitude from our audience. We are going to share the recording, the slides, so look for that in an email from us, folks. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to take our evaluation survey. And we really appreciate all that you do, Elaine, and all that our audience does. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you. And you'll have my contact information, so feel free to reach out. Really love being with all of you. Thank you.